The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Banks, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. For more information about the Charlotte Ledger or to subscribe to our newsletters, visit thecharlotteledger.com. Today's episode, we're talking to Mark Washburn, who is a former Charlotte Observer columnist. At the beginning of July 2025, Mark wrote a series for the Ledger called Graveyard of the Atlantic, which explored North Carolina East Coast pirate, shipwreck, and buried treasure legend and myth. This podcast episode was recorded in front of an audience at the Sharon at SouthPark retirement community, in which he explained his research process and some interesting and surprising things that he learned while he was writing and reporting the series. And at the end of the discussion, we opened it up for questions from the audience. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I think the first thing I wanted to ask you is if you could just kind of tell us a little bit more about this series and what it is, what it covers for the people that maybe haven't got to read it yet.
Sure, I'll be happy to. First of all, I want you to know I'm an English major who found work. So now you have a story to tell your grandchildren. I'm educated in West Virginia, which I don't, want people to know. So I use a lot of fancy words in my writing, so nobody will understand that. But part of being an English major is that going into the newspaper business is you're up against all these journalism school graduates who don't know anything about anything because all they do is go out and pretend to be working for the student newspaper, and that evening they're smoking pot in their rooms and talking about cheapest beer in town. Whereas we English majors have to work all the time and read and learn stuff. And one of the books I read along the way is Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And when I teach writing, I read the first chapter of Treasure Island to young writers. And I go, listen to this. It's 79 words long. When you're done with those 79 words, you know who the narrator is. It's Jim Hawkins, the cabin boy, and he's going to tell the story. You know there's a villain named Long John Silver who's only got one leg. You know that there's Dr. Trelawney and a couple other characters. You know who all the major characters are. You already know there's a cloud of doom hanging over Treasure Island. And you know there is treasure yet to be lifted, as he says. Well, I say this is the greatest lead, the greatest first paragraph you can put on a story ever written in literature, because you know all these things in the first paragraph, and now you can't wait to get to the second. And when I teach writing, I tell people, do not tell me the sun was hot on Monday afternoon and the people straggled in tired and weary to the room. I don't want to hear that. Just hit me with something right away that I want to know. So for that, I'm an expert on piracy. Because I read Treasure Island, and that's the main thing you have to read. That's one of the greatest books on piracy. Well, we came up with the idea to write about the Atlantic Ocean in the summer. It wasn't my idea. It was my boss's idea, Doug Miller. He used to be my editor at the Charlotte Observer, and he continues to be my editor for the Charlotte Ledger, so life goes on. But he said, let's do something about the ocean. I said, that's fabulous. And I said, Graveyard of the Atlantic. That's what they call it. Let's do Graveyard of the Atlantic. How much fun will that be? There's so many things we can do. So I looked into it a little bit. We had lunch. I said, I got 5 stories, knock your socks off. I got a ghost ship. There's a ghost ship out there. You got to have a ghost ship. I got pirates. I got a lot of pirate stuff out there. Did you know there's 2 battleships lying at the bottom of the Graveyard of the Atlantic, 2 U.S. battleships? No, how'd you find that out? I said I wrote to the National Archives. I do some work for the National Archives every once in a while. I should be in the National Archives. And you can ask them questions. And they got back to me and they said, yep, we have some shipwrecks from the Graveyard of the Atlantic, but we're not going to give them all to you because we have to do some other work. But here's a few you might be able to use. And they show me a picture of a plane bombing a United States battleship off of Kitty Hawk. And I'm like, how long has this been going on? I've never heard about this. Well, it's true. They did it. They used it for target practice to make a point. So we had a couple other stories along those lines, but I want to tell you one. I'm going to tell you one. I'm going to tell you the best story I found. So there's this ship coming out of New Orleans in 1837, full of stuff. Got about 100 people on it. And it's a side wheeler. And side wheelers, I don't know, stern wheelers or side wheelers, there's all these things. But now we're into the age of steam. And they catch the Gulf Stream off Pensacola. And the Gulf Stream is just a conveyor belt. You can get on the Gulf Stream and just ride along. It's your magic carpet if you're a mariner. And it'll take you all the way up to North Carolina. You don't even have to turn on the boat. It just does it for you. Well, beautiful sailing weather, beautiful days, one day after another. They're coming on up. And the captain has a dog. The dog's name is Pillow. The reason the dog's name is Pillow is that it sleeps all the time. It's like my wife. I'm calling her Pillow from now on. Pillow loves to nap. Pillow naps in the cabin. Pillow naps in the cargo hold. Pillow naps on the deck. Pillow everybody loves Pillow. What a gentle little dog it is until they get to Cape Lookout, North Carolina. They make the big turn. They're coming up from Florida, and now suddenly, wham, they drive in to a fog bank. This is a horrible place to go blind because it's all shoals. The shoals there reach out like squid arms 10 miles sometimes. They shift all the time. Well, now the captain's got a problem. He doesn't know where he is. He knows he's in a bad spot, and wham, hits a sandbar right now. Okay, they look through the mist, and they see the Cape Lookout lighthouse. And they go, well, this is a bad place to be. That's not a pretty sight. That means we're going to break up on this reef. And sure enough, the boat begins to crack up. The guys on the beach come out, and they're trying to hurl a line out to this stricken ship. They can't reach it, can't get there. People on the boat are trying to throw a line. They can't get it in. The boat is beginning to break up in this storm. The storm is shoving the ship. It's getting bad and bad and bad. And finally somebody says, if only we could swim to the shore with a line, we could be saved. Otherwise, all is lost. And one of the seamen said, what about Pillow? Well, what's the harm? So they tie the line to Pillow's collar, and the captain takes his little dog, and he points to the people on the shore. He goes, Pillow, go get him. And he hurls Pillow into the frothing sea. And Pillow goes down, he comes up, and everybody's like, there's Pillow. Pillow's dog paddling furiously. Wham, big wave comes. Where's Pillow? There's Pillow. All the way he bobs up and down like a cork. And finally he disappears into the waves at the shore. And they're like, what happened? Did he make it? Did Pillow make it with the rope? And then they see the people charge into the surf and fetch Pillow out. Carry him out. They have the line. They rescue everybody on the ship. In 30 minutes, the ship is driftwood. That was my favorite story out of all the research I did. I read 8 or 9 books to get all the stories of the Atlantic and all that. And Pillow was the best. Now, I don't know this, but my guess is that Pillow got the best meal he's ever had in his life, and no doubt the longest nap.
Well, I was going to ask, so how do you know that happened? So you said 9 books throughout this whole process, the whole writing and researching process?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. What you fingered there is, how do we know all the things about the graveyard of the Atlantic? There are 2,000 ships that are known to have sank. There are 5,000 ships believed to have sank. And ships go aground all the time, even today with GPS and all these other things. Fishing vessels and whatnot still go aground out there. So it has been stacking up ships for all time. I said, well, I'm a good reporter. I want to know what the first ship was. I'm going to figure out what the first ship was. Everybody must know what the first ship is out there. So I start doing my research, and I'm digging, call the archives. Well, it turns out in 1526, the Spaniard who's down in Florida looking for places to build condos, Lucas Vasquez de Alio, thank you, he wrecks at Cape Fear. He's lost. They're always lost. He wrecks at Cape Fear, 1526. So that's bad. I go, well, good. We know that. But the first documented shipwreck, in other words, the records in Spain show that. But for the other Europeans, it's the ship Tiger in 1585. This is one of Sir Walter Raleigh's ships. He's sending ships over here to establish that colony at Roanoke, which didn't go well, as you all know. Some of you might remember that. I do. Anyway, so that goes back, but now I find one more. So I didn't write this story because I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't sort it out. But the Indians are yakking one day with some mariners in 1564. Now, how you talk to Indians in those days, I don't know. I mean, you didn't have a lot in common. You know, Indians had never seen a horse. The others haven't seen seashells or whatever. I mean, you know, so you'd think there was a lot of hard words to come up with. But the Indians are telling the Spaniards who come in for water, we had a shipwreck here last year. They aren't saying it this way. But, you know, we had a shipwreck here last year. So that'd be about 1563. And it smashed up and it came in and everybody had died. So we just stripped the ship of everything useful. I go, that's fabulous. I've got the first record of a salvage.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So I want to kind of go into now, if that's okay with you, each story. I know we could sit here for hours and talk about everything that you probably learned in those 9 books that you read, but I want to talk about the first story of the series, which was about, I think it was about shipwrecks, and it was about a ship called the Carol A. Deering that's been dubbed as the ghost ship. And so I was wondering if you could tell us why it's called the ghost ship. And I know that there's like a 6-toed cat involved in that story and coffee left on the stove, very eerie. So I was wondering if you could kind of tell us about that.
So I guess by now you notice that I like to get critters in my stories because I think people like critters. So Carol A. Deering is spotted off the coast of Hatteras, floating with the sails up, and it's a terrible storm. It takes 5 days to board the ship. The rescuers on land can't get out to it. They row out to it. They don't see anybody in distress. The ship is on the shoals. 5 days, finally, before a boat can get out there. They go aboard. There's still coffee in the urn. There's still food on the table. The charts are out. The 2 lifeboats are gone, and there is not a soul aboard except this one little frightened kitten. 6 toes, like a Hemingway kitten. So they take the kitten and they get off the boat and they go back and they go, what happened? Well, this is very odd. It's like the Mary Celeste, you know, off in Polynesia, wherever that was, or the Flying Dutchman, which occasionally is seen, you know, by people who've had a few. But this one's for real. You can touch it. They can't find the crew of 11. The captain is a well-respected guy from up in Maine. The ship is a beautiful schooner, one of those things, you know, like when you bought your dad Old Spice for Father's Day, you know, that ship on the label. Well, it's one of those, 5-masted, beautiful schooner, and it had been carrying coal to South America. It had come back empty, and now this. The captain had reported in Barbados, where they stopped to take on provisions, that his first mate was going to kill him. First mate was hostile and mutinous and going to kill him. And now the ship shows up in North Carolina and no one is aboard. Well, 6 months later, this guy, his name is Christopher Columbus Gray, he's a fisherman on the Outer Banks. He makes an astonishing discovery. He finds on his daily walk a bottle. Inside is a note. He takes the note out, he dries it out, he reads it, and the note says that Deering is under attack by pirates and we're all hiding all over the boat. Please tell headquarters back in Maine. Well, this causes a big furor because about 20 boats have gone missing in the last year or so in this area. Well, they've all gone missing in storms, and it's a bad place to be, and some of them are probably hauling rum, so may have disappeared under other circumstances. But anyway, it's got to be pirates. The Russians, the Bolsheviks, somebody's behind it. And so the government puts on the gas, and they check everything out, and they assign agents, and about the end of the summer, a guy from the Commerce Department goes down to Hatteras and summons Christopher Columbus Gray to the lighthouse. And Christopher Columbus Gray is trying to get a job at the lighthouse. He's been in the Navy, he's been a fisherman, and he thinks that's what it's all about. And he shows up, and the guy says, "Now, this isn't about the job, this is about that note you found. I've told your investigators everything I know about this note. Well, I want you to look at this." And he pulls papers out of his pocket and he hands it to him. And here is from the two handwriting experts, one the top guy at the U.S. Treasury Department and the next top guy at the U.S. Navy, and they both conclude that this note in the bottle, which, by the way, is at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library, and I have seen a copy of it. I didn't go out there, but you can always find things if you're an English major. And so he goes, you made this up. And Mr. Gregg, okay, well, actually, I was trying to get a job at the lighthouse, and I thought, you'd fire somebody if you found out that they didn't, observe the pirates, and I was trying to get a government job because I want a regular paycheck, so yeah, I did. And so the mystery of the pirates is over. Now, they never charged Mr. Gray because there was no statute that quite covered his villainy, but that's over. And to his dying day in 1952, that kind of followed him around, small town like Buxton. Question to this day, what happened to the Deering? Beautiful ship? Don't know. The ship broke up off of Hatteras. Part of it washed up at Hatteras. Stayed there for many, many years. The sand would blow off it. Here'd be its ribs. The sand would come back in, cover it up. Off, on, the Deering keeps coming back. And then Hurricane Ione in 1954 picks up the hull and carries it up to Ocracoke. It's still making northward progress, 50 years after it sank. So the Deering is still the great mystery ship, the ghost ship of the Atlantic, and it's restless still.
I think it was pirates. That's my guess.
You got pirates? Okay. I'm going with mutiny, but...
Well, speaking of pirates, you also had a story about Blackbeard, which I think that's a name that sounds familiar, hopefully, to most people. And I think the story was mainly about how the myth or the legend of Blackbeard wasn't exactly true, or maybe he wasn't as menacing as it's kind of maybe built up to be. Is that accurate? Is that kind of what you found?
Yeah, I didn't expect this. I just had read in the last year a book about piracy, another book about piracy. It's a very good look at the golden age of piracy, which wasn't that long, late 1600s, early 1700s, and it was over. All your big pirates came in those days. And Blackbeard, of course, to this day, he has restaurants named after him. You can't throw a rock on the Outer Banks without hitting a Blackbeard something or other. So, and I'd always heard what a fierce person he is. He'd say he'd stick cannon fuses in his beard, and when he plundered your boat to look more fearsome, which would probably work, except if you've ever set your hair on fire, you probably wonder whether that's true. So I get looking into Blackbeard. Blackbeard is the North Carolina pirate. He hid all over the Outer Banks. Turns out Blackbeard's a dud. No one ever told you this in school, did they? So Blackbeard, his name's Edward Teach. No one quite sure where he came from. Probably grew up in the Caribbean, maybe born in England. But anyway, he kind of just comes on the scene, and he just becomes a pirate. And he gets a crew, and he goes out, and he starts savaging vessels, and pretty soon he's got 5 or 6 ships. He's got 120 people. He's a commodore, and he's the terror of the Caribbean. That's the story. Well, the fact is, his career only lasted 18 months. There's not a shred of evidence he ever killed anybody. He went crawling to the North Carolina colonial governor asking for a pardon, which were being handed out like traffic tickets, just because they didn't have any way to pursue pirates anyway. If you promised to knock it off, that was good enough. So he's out on Ocracoke, living happily, but he's kind of taken the business back up. Governor Spotswood up in Virginia says, I'm going to send down some guys to beat up and put an end to Blackbeard, and he does. They sail down, they sail into Ocracoke. All the men are hidden below decks. It looks like a sloop with a lot of money on it. Blackbeard's out there, fires some cannon shots, runs aboard, and as soon as he gets aboard, all the Marines come up from beyond. They shoot Blackbeard 5 times, then they bring out their swords, and now he's dead. They order that the head of Blackbeard be taken off to torture. He's beheaded by the Marines from Virginia, and they throw his body into the sea. And this is the part where it gets a little strange. The body is said to have swum around the boat 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, pick a number. I'm not sure that happened. But anyway, that's the end of Blackbeard.
Well, you also had a story about lost treasure, or maybe the lack of lost treasure that's off the coast of North Carolina. Is it true that there isn't as much treasure down there as most people might think there is?
See, that's the terrible thing. Florida is stuffed with treasure. You can't walk down the beach in Florida without tripping over a chest of treasure. It's just all of it washes up in Florida. Because the treasure ships for Spain would come out of Havana. They'd drive right into a hurricane and spill their goods all over the ground outside of Florida. But if they made it through without a hurricane, they'd turn right about Cape Canaveral and sail over to Spain. So we never got them up here. We were robbed by the trade wind. But there was one case. In about 1585, the El Salvador and 2 consorts sailed from Havana, headed for Cadiz, Spain. And they're getting up around Cape Canaveral. Wham, here comes the hurricane from behind, picks them up, same story. Gulf Stream drags them up north. The storm, the Gulf Stream, for 3 days, they're fighting for their lives. And finally, they get to Cape Lookout, and now they go aground. The other 2 ships go aground out there, and they are salvaged. They hit the bank, and they stayed afloat, not afloat, but their mast stuck up so you could go out and get the treasure off of them. That was fabulous. Not the El Salvador. 8 men survived. They swam to shore. They looked out, and they couldn't see where they'd been or how they'd gotten there. And to this day, the remains of the El Sal are out there somewhere, probably off Beaufort. Now, about 1985, salvers got a deal with the state. 25-75. We will get 75%. We'll give the state 25%. We are going to find the El Salvador. They go out, and they're looking, and they're looking, and they're looking, and they find a shipwreck, ancient shipwreck, right outside of the bar. They go, this is it. They get looking. They start pulling up stuff. They found Blackbeard's ship. Poor Blackbeard, poor Salvers, and now that expedition has gone to court and has been locked in fierce court business for about 10 years, and they've never found the remains of the El Salvador. It remains out there somewhere. Now, you know, all those chests of coins and whatever are just dying to come ashore somewhere, like their friends in Florida do. But so far, not a bit.
Is there anything that I know you shared one of your favorite stories that you learned with the dog pillow that swam ashore and saved the day, but was there anything that you learned that was surprising that you didn't know before? I know reading Treasure Island and your wealth of knowledge of pirates, but was there anything new, anything that surprised you about, whether it was a specific shipwreck or a pirate or, any story like that?
Yeah, there were a few things. Now everybody knows there's a bunch of lighthouses out there, right? You've seen Cape Hatteras, famous lighthouse and all that. Well, the reason is that all these ships were obviously going down out there, and you needed the mariners to have a good way to figure out where they were. Well, even with those lighthouses for a couple hundred years, the storms are so fierce out there that you can lose sight of them. So the danger to maritime interest is worse right off of North Carolina than anywhere else up and down the coast. There's a couple other areas that are really bad. Cape Cod, really bad. Nova Scotia, really bad. Long Island sometimes. But really, the area outside of North Carolina is the absolute worst. And over the years, the government kept building what they called life-saving stations. And in these places, there would be 8 men and a boat. And they're probably about 12 to 15 miles apart. And these men would go out and patrol the beaches every day looking for wrecks. They would sit up in the Widow's Watch looking for ships in distress, and they'd often see them. And these guys must have been built like oxen, because they would get in a boat and row 10 miles out to save the people on the ship and do all these heroic things. It was fantastic. This is a part of the state's history that I've never heard before. The other thing is just the absolute power of the sea. The Gulf Stream coming up from the south. Now, it's a conveyor that hauls all the heat out of the subtropics and brings it north. And it's a giant current. It's full of marine life. It's one of the most important things on the planet for survival for us, the way it cools the earth, the atmosphere. The other is the Labrador current coming down from the north, and it flows south. So you have these two currents that meet just about at Cape Hatteras. And they're two great serpents that just do damage to one another sometimes if they hit head on. And sometimes they do. And they just start making water spouts or tornadoes or whatever they do, whirlpools, because they are just such powerful, natural creatures. And that's one reason that graveyard of the Atlantic off of North Carolina is the most hazardous place for mariners and for shipping.
All right, so I think we're going to bring a microphone around when you ask your questions just so we can catch them for the podcast that we're recording. But does anybody have any questions for Mark?
Mark, there are stories about World War II, German submarines coming up to the coast and the crews coming on shore and buying provisions. Did you discover anything about that?
Yes, sir. I didn't go into it, but that's a fabulous question. So what was going on were two things. A bunch of German submarines were off the coast. At World War I, we just kind of went in for a knockout blow in Europe, and that we weren't in that war very long, 1917, 1918. Second World War, worse, because we had to prop up, as you know, Europe. We had to bring fuel, we had to bring men, we had to bring tanks. We had to bring everything to Europe or else it was going to fall. And shipping was critically important in that war. So in a way, the Merchant Marine didn't win that war, but would have lost that war. That would have been the reason if we had lost. So they were critically important. And the German subs would just sit off of Hatteras or these other places, kind of in the shoals, and wait for all these convoys to pass. It was nicknamed Torpedo Junction. There were so many attacks. And there were 400 attacks on Allied shipping in a course of about, I think, 16, 18 months at the beginning of World War II. They were killing us. And they finally brought in blimps. They brought in airplanes. They tried this. They tried that. They put destroyers out there. They went to great lengths and finally drove the wolf packs away. However, they sank one. They sank a couple. But one they sank off the coast about 1942. The crewmen began to wash up, and all these stories, the bodies wash up the next day. They keep washing up. It's terrible. The crewmen began to wash up, and there were 8 crewmen who were wearing civilian clothes, who had American money in their pocket, who were obviously going to be dropped somewhere to go do sabotage. I mean, I don't think they were coming ashore for ice cream. But yes, sir, that actually happened.
Mark, no, I'm sorry, just to follow up on that. I mean, that wasn't well known at the time, right? That the German U-boats were out there?
All hush-hush, yeah. There was a news blackout declared. I think the telephones were taken out for a while. They didn't want, like the Germans didn't know how well they were doing. I don't know, they don't have periscopes or what? But they didn't want the news of the terrible slaughter along the Gulf Stream to be known, because it would have hurt morale, or it would have made the Navy look bad. I'm not sure which one it was, but anyway, that was the idea, and the President Roosevelt actually put a news blackout on that. So all this stuff has only come out in latter years.
Well, if there's no other question, then anything to add after all that?
These people have a bar that opens at 5. And I am not standing between that door and this crowd.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening. For more information on the Charlotte Ledger, visit our website at thecharlotteledger.com.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.